going to show you a little raw conversion technique that's similar to HDR filter, but I don't like HDR filters. In case you don't know, an HDR filter is like HDR stands for high dynamic range, and basically when you take a whole bunch of photos at different exposures and then combine them all together, you get a really kind of cool tonal range. But I don't know, I don't really think it looks cool at all. I think it looks kind of dumb. But that's only because when you drop it in kind of like one filter and have the computer do it for you, it just, I don't know, the results aren't very good. So I'm going to show you how to do kind of like similar effects that you can control that won't look like a hunk of shit. So anyway, I got my picture here, and I didn't choose the best exposure of the series, mainly because everybody screws up time to time, and I'm just going to show you how you can still kind of rescue this picture here. But basically it was lit with one huge softbox in front, a light from behind, and also a little bit of another softbox on the grass. But because I've shot in RAW, I have kind of a latitude of about 3 exposures. So in my RAW conversion program here, which is Lightroom, if I drag the exposure around, you can see that a lot of the detail in the clouds can still be rescued. Basically, my final edit of this photo is going to look like this. But in order to, you notice the main kind of effect in that photo is like the dramatic sky. And the dramatic sky is there, but of course if I stop down the exposure to use the dramatic sky, the dudes are going to be way too dark. So what I'm going to do is first I'm just going to make one raw conversion to make sure that the guys look good and that the guys are well lit. So that looks good, I don't know, about there. And I've done a few other adjustments too, like the contrast and my white balances as I shot it, but you know, I turned the saturation down a little bit, but that's basically it. So just gonna export this into Photoshop. Alright, and then I'm just gonna keep everything the same and just drop the exposure down so I can get that sky looking really cool. That looks cool. And I'm also gonna export that into Photoshop. So because it's all coming from the same file, I'm just going to use unique names so it doesn't overwrite itself. Alright, cool. So now I've got both conversions of the exact same picture in Photoshop, and I'm just going to close Lightroom because my computer ain't all that great and don't want it to lag it down. But anyway, basically what I'm going to do is get the selection tool here, and I'm just gonna throw this lighter version on top of the darker version. So I'm just holding Alt and Control and just dragging her on top there. And if you hold Control, you can kind of position it and it'll kind of lock in position. Alright, so now I can close this one that I just dragged over, and then you'll notice now in this file I've got, in my layers menu, I've got the dark version, and then I dragged over the lighter exposure, which is on top. See, I can turn it on and off. Yep. So basically what I want to do is I want to use the sky from the bottom dark image, but use the lightness of the top image. I could do this in a number of ways. I could either like use the selection tool. I could set a big selection and hit like delete and kind of show through the background layer like that, but that's going to make kind of like some rough edges, so I could always, you know, feather the selection a little bit and that'll, you know, smooth it out. But most times you're not always going to have this kind of nice selection, and you're going to have to either use a layer mask, or just like the getaway that I do is I just get the eraser brush, and when you get this brush and run it over top of the top layer, basically the bottom one is shining through it. So you know, I could make a selection again and just easily erase it, but I'm going to use the eraser tool just to show you, just because, you know, don't always have those sweet options. working up the hardness of the edge just to go around stuff. This would be a good time to throw on some tunes. One thing I like to do is actually listen to the band that I'm photographing, unless they suck, of course, but I can say a lot of the bands that I photographed really, really rock. But this guy here, his face is a little bit too bright compared to the other ones. So what I'm going to do is just kind of half and half it. So I'm going to turn down the opacity of my eraser brush and just kind of go over his face. So, you know, a little bit of the lightness is coming through from the top exposure, but also a little bit of darkness is coming through. You know, with a soft edge brush, you can kind of butcher it up, and nobody's going to really notice. Yeah, I'm kind of doing a pretty butch job here. I'm sure, like, if I use the selection tool and feathered it or something, it'd be a little easier, but again, I gotta show you guys and sacrifice my well-being. A good way to kind of like find the spots that you miss is just to turn off the top layer, and I can see kind of where I messed up. Alright, cool. That's good enough just kind of to show you the basic idea. But also for this grass here, since you're erasing away, you can kind of manually control where the dark and the light falls. So what I like to do is like to turn the opacity down on the brush, and you get just kind of like nice subtle brush strokes. And that's a lie, I'll turn it up a little bit, but now you just get kind of like nice subtle brush strokes and kind of paint where you want the grass to go darker. Yep, and that's looking pretty good right there. So just to reinforce my point again, I can show you with another example in this little raw conversion trick that I do. So I've got the original photo here, of course, with a few little conversions again. You know, I changed the contrast and brightness and what have you, and not much else. I mean, it was lit with about I think 3 or 4 studio lights. The exposure that I took the picture at looks pretty good. Don't have to adjust it really. So gonna export that one into Photoshop. Alright, but I'm also gonna do a really, really bright one. Okay. And I can export that one too. So I'm going to do the same thing I did last time, just by selecting it, holding Control and Alt and dragging her over. Alright, and I can hold Control to just kind of drag it around and lock it into position. Okay, I can just check that it's in the right place. That's cool. I can close this one. Alright, now what I can do is use the eraser brush and just kind of go over parts that I really want to bring out. And I'm doing this again. I'm just erasing away this top dark layer and revealing the lighter layer, the lighter exposure beneath. So for this, like, I can't really see the swords very good, so I just might want to go over the area kind of where the swords are. You know, just to make them really kind of pop out. And when you do this, it also makes you look like you used a lot more lights and reflectors and stuff than you actually did. So it's a good little trick, you know, to impress the ladies. Alright, and I can go over his cloak here too and just bring it out, make it really kind of pop out. And doing this, like, it always gives things a really cool kind of like 3D look as well, because you're lightening things that aren't really supposed to be lightened. So it always looks cool. That's a bit too much on his cloak there. But also I can see that his head was a little bit lost in the darkness here. And really I should have threw another light behind him, but when I did, it looked kind of like they were almost cut out and put in that location. So I decided to take it away and make it look a little bit more natural. But this location here is actually a place in Scarborough, Ontario. It's a sculpture garden that they used to rent out for wedding photographers. So I'd got my permits and everything because this was kind of a big shoot for a magazine and I didn't want it to get busted. So we had all these crazy people in like night costumes and they thought it was a medieval themed wedding, which is kind of funny, but no, we didn't get busted and it was a pretty good shoot. It's on the cover of Alternative Press magazine, September 2007. And the whole idea here is it's actually like a rock band, and the whole idea with the like night costumes is that usually this band, their photo shoots, they just do a bunch of silly stuff, which is pretty silly too, but it's kind of a different kind of humor, whereas it looks so serious and cinematic that you're like, whoa, that's a pretty cool picture, and then you realize that it's the band, and that's kind of what makes it funny. You know, at least I hope it looks cinematic. Just gonna fiddle around here. See under his armor here, needs a little bit of lightening up as well. Let's check their faces here. Yeah, you can also use it to kind of get in close and use it for kind of small details like his eyes here. If I were to erase away just kind of where his eyes are, you can get some really kind of natural eye enhancements that don't look too overdone. Yeah, it looks pretty good. I'm also just going to make these pillars in the background here look a little bit 3D. But it's a bush here. If you want to do a little experiment, you can erase the background layer and just kind of see where exactly you erased on the top layer and what's shining through and what's not. And you can switch on and off that top layer and just see what you've done. And to me, that's looking pretty decent.